Welcome back everyone dito sa latest episode ng FYI, a Voter Education Program or series rather. At ito na, nasa final stretch na tayo ng elections. So marami tayong pag-usapan. Kasama po natin, anong pangalan niyo ulit, sir? Dr. Sherwin Ona. Thank you very much, Sir Robin. And of course, the Dean.
Hello.
Hi.
Okay,
Thank you.
malapit na tayo sa election day. This is the D-Day is coming.
Yeah.
Obviously, ang dami mga lumilitaw na mga impormasyon galing sa National Security Council, galing sa iba't ibang ahensya ng gobyerno ukol dito sa mga threats daw sa election integrity natin. At ngayon, no less than your AFP chief, si General Bronner, openly talking about infiltration, people in the government talking about China supposedly, allegedly, getting troll farms. Si Commodore Tariela had even a tweet the other day, screenshots of, parang may contract pa nga yata, di ba? Na talagang So, how worried are you, Dr. Ona? Because again, this goes back to our discussion. Both of us are visiting, time in Taiwan to study yung sharp power operations there. How worried you are that we're in the same boat or lake at least?
Yeah, Richard, alam mo, when you hear our officials talking about it, no, and seemingly warning our people, no, tingin ko nakakabahala talaga to, no, at nakakatakot, no, dahil pag narinig mo to coming from the Chief of Staff, from the National Security Council, syempre merong credibility ito, hindi ba? And kung makikita mo naman, very obvious, di ba? Yung recent na Senate hearing ni Senator Tolentino, hindi ba?
Right.
Na in-expose niya yung kontrata between Invitas and the Chinese Embassy, no? Allegedly for disinformation activities or campaigning, no? Hindi bago to kung sa ating mga scholar, hindi to bago kasi nakikita natin to na ginagawa sa Taiwan, ginagawa sa Australia at sa iba pang mga bansa, no?
Hindi, sa Pilipinas yung ginagawa. Kasi kung titingnan mo ibang trolls or yung talking points nila, basically press release ng isang
pero ang punto ko is, ngayon lang natin talaga nakikita yung tinasawag natin na connecting the dots, di ba? Ngayon na nagdun sa hearing on disinformation, umamin yung mga vloggers doon na nag-training sila sa China. Tapos makikita mo ito na may mga kontrata na pinirmahan mismo yung Chinese Embassy for disinformation activity. So anong ibig sabihin nito? No? Talagang totoo yung banta sa atin. And kailangan ma-realize to ng mga voters natin na hindi to chismis-chismis lang o bola-bola lang, di ba? Na baka naman hindi totoo yan. O baka naman nagpo-politicize lang yung administration.
So are you saying this is a smoking gun evidence? Is that the level threshold already?
Yeah,
hindi lang connecting the dots.
Hindi lang to connecting the dots. At ito yung tip of the iceberg. I believe, Richard, hindi lang to yung pa-isa-isa o pa-dalawa-dalawa dyan. Ano? Kung titingnan mo yung example ng Taiwan, this is a massive, deliberate and strategic operations. No? Hindi to ginangyayari ng 1 week, 1 month, or even a year. No? Matagal na silang nandyan. Yeah. And winawarningan tayo ng NEC natin dyan no? Na nandyan na sila, nakaano lang sa atin yan. No? Hindi natin nakikita. Pero ngayon, unti-unti, syempre, na-uncover to ng government natin.
Dr. Garcia, going back to this, you always hear itong argument na, nag-spy din naman ng US, yung CIA, matagal lang ginagawa na ito. Kumbaga, normal yan. Everyone's doing, I remember even si Prime Minister Mahathir back in the day, he said something like, it's okay, let both sides spy on us, something like that. How is this different?
Yeah, I think we have a clear conflict of interest with China. So, kasi
nawala with the US, just to be clear.
Nawala with the US. Kasi yung US, kahit paano, gusto niyang protektahan yung waterways natin, di ba? Make it free,
and open,
with order, and things like that, no? And so, iba yung ginagawa ng China. And I think, kailangan ma-realize ng mga tao na itong strategy ng China is not just to dominate the region. It's not just the West Philippine Sea na physically getting the islands in the West Philippine Sea to create airstrips. You also have to realize that there are two other facets. No? Ito yung economic, pati yung cognitive or yung intervention niya sa demokrasya ng bansa. No? So, it does that in many ways. Yung nagpapalaganap ka ng propaganda, pro-China candidates. And also, para makonbinse yung mga tao na mabait naman pala yung China. Pero totoo lang, hindi talaga. No? There's a clear conflict of interest with China. And so multifaceted yung strategy talaga. And sa palagay ko, iba yung scale and yung volume nitong ginagawa ng China ngayon and yung timing. No? So, dapat talaga malaman ng tao yan na napaka-importante pag-isipan to ngayon, especially na yung timing na sa election pa, especially nakikita natin itong mga...
we'll go to the election shortly since we're going...
Dagdagan ko lang yung sinabi ni Doc Robin, no? siguro pwede mong i-differentiate yung US campaign tsaka yung Chinese campaign in terms of its intention. Kasi ito maliwanag eh. West Philippine Sea is the prize. And undermining our government, promoting distrust and chaos among our people, ito yung centerpiece ng kanilang strategy. No? Kaya ito ay talagang nakakatakot.
Although, I mean, again, I'm just playing the devil's advocate. I remember yung Reuters report about Pentagon spread. I mean, that was one of the most nonsense. And these are stuff like, why would you spread this information about Chinese vaccine inefficacy when actual studies and information can do that for you? Like, I really didn't get that. But halos walang pumatal nun. But again, yun ang ginagamit ng kabila. Like, why are you accusing China? What about US? Yung whataboutism na yan. Ikaw din, are you seeing false equivalence there, as Dr. Garcia was emphasizing here? And at the same time, do you feel the Philippines is really at the forefront of a new Cold War? Because this feels like Vienna, Berlin, whereby spies of different superpowers are playing games here. Yeah?
Well, very clear naman. The writings are on the wall already. At yung, as mentioned earlier ni Dr. Robin tsaka ni Dr. Sherwin earlier, no? Nakadesenyo talaga itong ginagawa ng China. Na talagang, it's a way to subjugate or unti-unti sakupin tayo nang hindi na dun sa marahas na paraan, kundi sa isang paraan where binabago yung ating pagtingin sa kanilang mga bansa. Imagine mo, yung loyalty ngayon ng mga Pilipino ay, nag-iiba ang narrative. At nakakatakot dahil yung mga Pilipino yung mga kapatid Pilipino na inaabuso at hindi pinapayagan makapangisda sa West Philippine Sea ay hindi nakakuha ng isang malaking suporta mula sa mamamayang Pilipinas, no? Kundi may marinig ka pang mga iba na parang sisisipan natin, ba't kayo naglayag dyan? So, nagiging successful. At natatakot ako doon dahil meron talagang level of success itong ginagawa ng
ano po yung indicator ni Dean for you to say that?
Dahil, number one, kung titignan mo halimbawa itong mga kandidato ngayon sa darating na election.
You really jumped to that right away. Mainit pa lang tayo.
Importante, makita natin kasi huwag na tayong magtago dahil yung mga kandidatong siguradong mananalo, never ko narinig yan nagsalita sa usapin ng West Philippine Sea. Never ko narinig yan sa usapin ng Pogo. Never ko narinig yan, for example, to expose yung mga corruption, mga scandal na nangyari during the time, for example, na may mga commitment dito yung Chinese government sa kanilang mga proyekto na hindi naman natuloy.
Yeah.
At nasan sila? So, yun lang ay mga clear indicators na unti-unti nagiging matagumpay. That's why, crucial itong election ito. Sabi ko nga, this should be a make or break, in a sense, no? To really define and
Matatapang sila sa ICC.
demarcate na guhitan na natin. Sino ba talaga dito ang magtataguyod sa interes ng mga Pilipino? At sino rito ang magtataguyod sa interes ng bansang China? So, yun dapat pag-aralan ng mga Pilipino.
I want to go more into that kasi one of the concerns is pag hindi na kukuha yung national government sa LGU level na pumapasok. That's generally the idea with the sharp power. That's the term they use, no? But I want to also go back later on dun sa issue ng what I call a double Cold War. So, isang banda, there's the great power competition and infiltration, and then meron ka pang itong Duterte versus Marcos na very stark yung differences and visions and all, no? So, this is a time whereby nagsasabay yung dalawa na yan, eh. Kaya napaka-sensitibo. But let's focus muna again dito sa tinatawag na sharp power operation. Dr. Una, like for the purpose of our audience, there's a reason why scholars came with a new terminology na sharp power, right? Because the way that authoritarian superpowers try to infiltrate and weaponize freedoms within democracies is quite different from their usual espionage and spycraft that you see with, which all countries do anyway. Like, every country has a spy agency, intelligence agency. But sharp power is specifically referring to what authoritarian superpowers do to undermine democracies from within. Can you put that into a bigger context para mag-gets ng tao what is at stake here? Just in case sabi nila, lahat naman nagsaspy, di ba? Parang gano'n.
So, bakit nila ginagawa, so to speak?
And
no?
bakit dapat ma-concern?
Bakit gano'n ang estilo, no? Basically kasi, dapat maintindihan ng mga tao natin na itong mga gumagawa ng ganitong mga kabuktutan, no? Sabihin na nating malign actions or kabuktutan, ano? gusto nila kasing i-replace yung current status quo, ano? Gusto nilang sabihin na yung aming sistema o yung aming paniniwala o yung aming filosofiya ay mas maganda o mas superior kesa doon sa tinatamasa nyo ngayon. So that is why yung sharp power kasi undermining democratic institutions and values, no? Kasi nga yung gustong ipalit is an antithesis of that order, no? So,
So just to give an example, for instance, in Georgia, di ba, ang accusation is Russia is backing illiberal authoritarian figures at the expense of liberal democratic figures. So the whole Georgian democracy, for instance, is allegedly at
target, di
risk,
ba?
right?
Oh. Dito naman sa atin, it's a battle between yung hierarchical sinocentric, no? Yung
Tributary.
tributary, tama. And yung rules-based order, no? Yung saan ba tayo naniniwala? Naniniwala ba tayo sa mga rules? Naniniwala ba tayo sa power ng institution? Naniniwala ba tayo sa idea ng sovereignty ng isang bansa at yung kanyang agency, ano yung kanyang karapatan, no? Compared dun sa paniniwala na gustong ipasok ng mga nagpo-push ng sharp power na right is might might is right, di ba? Yung malaki kami dapat ang maging hegemon dyan, kami dapat ang maging leader sa region ninyo. Mas superior kami kasi maski kine-curtail namin yung mga karapatan ng mga tao namin, binibigay naman namin sa kanila yung mga pangangailangan nilang pang-ekonomiya o mga trabaho. Pero hawakan lang namin yung kanilang mga freedoms, no? Isa-survey lang namin sila, no? At bawal gumawa ng kalokohan, kasi nakikita namin kayo. Kaya namin kayong ipulis, no? Ganun yung kapalit na filosofiya, kaya itinutulak itong tinatawag na sharp power, ano?
At hindi natin maisisisi yung mga kaibigan natin dahil for 6 years, they had it good. Or at least, a big part of that 6 years, meron kang gobyerno dito na nagbigay ng basically a rough draft of what could be a future Philippines. Na
Legitimation.
yeah, exactly. I mean, basically, they were trying to replicate what they have in Cambodia. Like a Hun Sen, but writ large, right?
Ayan nga nakakalungkot yan, Richard, ano? Nung nakarang administrasyon nga, gusto nilang gawing yung Davao at saka Metro Manila, no? Isa-saturate nila ito ng mga CCTV, no? Ewan ko kung nabalitaan niyo yun, no?
That was a Huawei 7,000 in order
na parang
ALG yan,
parang kinokopya yung template na ginagawa sa China, no, na surveillance state, no?
Black Mirror.
Napo-profile yung yung personal by using your face, your retina scan, no? At pwede ka nang i-monitor ng estado. No, ngayon ang tanong, magpapa-monitor ka ba sa estado? Yeah. Gusto mo bang alam ng state na ang bawat galaw mo o ang bawat ginagawa mo? Yun ang Pagpapalit ba natin yung ating mga kalayaan, ang ating privacy, doon sa ganong sistema na gustong ibaksak sa atin?
Robin, I'll go back to this again. Obviously, automatically sasabihin nila, last time I checked, Donald Trump wants to take over Greenland. Last time I checked, Donald Trump also talks about might is right. But what does make US different from China? Is it because the US also, at the end of the day, still has a free media? Last time I checked, there are people, the Democratic Party is against him, there's a Supreme Court. These are not things you see with China, right? It's a monolithic system. Basically, one man calls the shot, right? Again, I'm just trying to parang see the other side of this argument, but we have to remind people, the US is a completely different ballgame, even though it's also an imperial power, some would say.
Well, yung pinakasagot dyan, siguro, is yung China, gusto talagang kunin yung West Philippine Sea. And gusto nila mag-build ng islands ng bases doon, no? And siguro kailangan natin balikan yung rason bakit nga ba ini-employ ng China itong smart power, soft power, hard power. Bakit ginagawa ng China itong espionage and all of these things? It's because it wants to dominate the region. And so you have to go back to the intentions of China kasi marami naniniwala na magbibigay ng trabaho yung China na dahil Asian tayo lahat, sipain na lang natin ang mga Western. Actually, sa totoo lang, hindi maganda ang intentions ng China tungkol sa atin. Sa mga Pilipino. Gusto talaga tayong saktan. Unahin nila yung sarili nilang interes, no? Kahit hindi na makatrabaho mga tao. Lahat ng nasa Pogo, puro Chinese, wala namang na-employ na Pilipino doon. Inuna pa nga ng
although to be fair,
natin.
ayaw din ng Chinese embassy sa mga Pogo na yan. I mean, pati sila, embarrassed din sila doon. Yeah.
Well, that's true.
Yeah,
that's true.
to
But,
be fair
you know,
again. Yeah.
and other things, di ba? So yung intention ng China talaga is malign against us, no? Hindi totoo na may magandang intention yung China sa atin. So I think yun yung una natin kailangan intindihin muna. Kasi some people make excuses for China. No? Na binibigyan, ay hindi, ano yan, Asian naman yan. Or, di ba? So, baka naman na
Atento,
makakuha tayo
pre.
ng economic growth dito. Di ba?
Atento, pre. Basically,
Atento,
ganun yan, ba?
oo,
They're one of us. At yung mga ganun naman
yeah,
argument.
oo,
Atento,
oo.
pre.
And during Duterte, yan yung rhetoric ni Duterte.
Si Lima Hong, no?
Yeah. Actually, naging hero bigla si Lima Hong, di ba? Naging anti-colonial, ano pala siya.
Pirata siya, isa pa rin.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, yung revisionist, biglang si Lima Hong ay naging parang anti-colonial leader. Like, sabi ko, ibang klase itong revisionism na to. No, but I want to go back to, like, let's look at the regional examples, right? Like, you know, a few years ago, yung Malaysia nag-explode dun sa debt trap issue. No less than Mahathir na favorite bash, parang favorite niya i-bash yung West, ay nagalit na rin sa China. And sabi niya, they're like tendencies for tyranny even dun sa isang Financial Times interview. Like, if you look around, are there examples that should worry us? Cambodia, for instance, what's happening there with the naval bases the Chinese are, what's happening to Sihanoukville, right? If you look at the warnings some of our bigger neighbors have been making. Kasi sasabihin naman ng tao to, like, oh, anong ebidensya mo? Dahil ang Pilipinas sa US Treaty ally pa lang. Do we have other examples whereby in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia, kung saan when China was given its way, medyo naging interesting. Kasi I cited Georgia for Russia. Some would say Ukraine, some would say, you know, Moldova. You know, we can go with Montenegro. From your scholarship, looking at other ASEAN countries, probably with the exception of Singapore and Vietnam, right? Are there examples that worries you about China's
una,
influence?
hindi talaga na nire-respeto yung rights ng Pilipinas. No? Inimbento lang naman talaga nila yung 9-dash line. I think that's the number one. So, even if both of us are claimant states, pwede namang hindi sila pumunta doon, pag-usapan muna natin. Pero ayaw nila makipag-usap, pinipilit nila na sa kanila, kahit hindi naman pala sa kanila.
Thank you for it. Din, ikaw, like, as an educator, as someone who's also, I mean, how do we make sure na hindi ito maging parang hysterical, anti-China, racism, or prejudice? Kasi that's also the other concern people are raising. Like,
I totally
okay,
agree
you have to
with
talk about
that.
national security, pero ingat rin kayo, mamaya, you know, it becomes because we saw in our neighboring countries, things can get ugly. There were like anti-Chinese pogroms in Vietnam back in 2014. Things got out of control. They were burning down anything that looked Chinese, including Taiwanese. How do you make sure we responsibly approach a legitimate threat without undermining the social fabric of our society, our Chinoy brothers and sisters and compatriots, di ba? Our relationship with them.
Kaya maganda talaga na i-distinguish natin. Iba yung Chinese government policy.
Yung Communist Party of
iba
China.
Yung mga tao. In particular, iba yung Communist Party.
Yeah.
Na run nga ngayon ni Xi Jinping na even himself, sa binagong konstitusyon, nandun na siya. Meron na Xi Jinping thought. Would you imagine after Mao Zedong, siya lang yung sumunod sa ganong legacy na in-include niya yung sarili niya bilang bahagi ng konstitusyon ng China. So, iba yung gobyerno, iba yung Communist Party ng China who's now promoting its interests at iba yung mga tao. At makasaysayan din naman, maganda rin naman yung mga relasyon natin sa mga Chinese, yung may mga Filipino-Chinese, marami tayong mga kaibigan diyan, mga kamag-anak to some extent. May lahi tayo yan. No, I think it's very important to distinguish this characterization. So this will help us to separate what is really the policies right now being pushed by the Communist Party of China,
CCP.
getting the West Philippine Sea in subjugating and weakening, subjugating us and weakening our democratic institutions. And the people itself who are still working with us, sharing their knowledge and collaborating with some projects. So, dapat maliwanag din yun.
I want to go,
Dagdagan
you
ko
want
yung
to talk
sinasabi
about that?
ni Dina tsaka ni Robin, ano? Kasi dapat din nating maunawaan yung strategy na ini-employ ng Communist Party, ano? Kasi gray zone strategy kasi yan, no? Na sobrang ambiguous, no? Mahirap siyang
50 Shades of Gray Zone. Kasi hindi lang siya one version, like ang daming versions.
Yun yung hirap dito kasi merong mga legal at illegal. Tapos nagbo-border into uncertainty, At yung mga authorities natin, when they look at it, parang hindi nila alam kung paano magre-react. And
so, anong example niyo, for instance?
Usually, it takes time for them to react. Like, for example, itong sa disinformation, di ba? Ang tagal-tagal na nangyayari nito, pero kailan lang nag-hearing ang ating Kongreso at kailan
Na may
lang
mga PR companies tayo na kinakontrata to basically
ngayon
do,
lang yan, pero
yeah,
it has been happening for a decade or more,
Yeah.
di ba? So, ibig ko sabihin, itong ganitong mga strategiya talaga ay nakadisenyo para talaga no, yung mahirapan din
May
yung
level of
gobyerno
confusion.
natin. Oo, may level of confusion, may level of uncertainty. Ngayon, nagtanong ka kanina, paano tayo makakaano, no? Para hindi naman magkaroon ng discrimination doon sa mga kapatid natin sa Chinese community. Ako, isang dyan, yung mga sunlight initiatives, no?
Right.
More transparent ka
different.
dapat. Kung ikaw ay Chinese Association at alam mong ginagamit ka ng pwede kang gamitan ng United Front,
yeah.
mag-communicate ka na sa gobyerno natin. Sabihin mo na hindi kami part nito and we are willing to cooperate with our security or law enforcement agencies kung sa tingin nyo meron kayong kailangan sa amin. So maging straightforward lang yung ating mga
But that's the challenge, right? Because some of the leaders of the community, the tendency is whenever there's concern about, United Front, ay parang instinctively, prejudice
Sasabihin
yan.
nila.
Yeah, I mean, I don't need to name names. Some of these community leaders who are always interviewed. Ang tingin ko lang, and I talk to a lot of our Chinoy brothers, sabi ko, ba't yung iba sa kanya, sabi niya, hindi constructive yung ganun eh. Yung immediately, hindi prejudice yan. The same way, you cannot say any Chinese activity is illicit, right? So you have to find that balance kung saan yung communities are actually constructively collaborating in a national security and national interest way.
Absolutely, di ba?
Yeah.
Yun yung idea na magkakaroon ka nitong mga spaces na ganito para mag-usap yung mga different parties, Kasi ayaw naman natin ma-branding yung ating mga kapatid na nasa Chinese community na kayo ay spies or kayo ay part ng isang espionage group,
I'm even talking about the Chinoys who are Filipino citizens. Even they feel they're being parang stigmatized, di ba? Mali yun, di ba?
Oo, tsaka kumbaga nada-downgrade yung kanilang contribution sa society natin na
Laki,
importante at napakalaki.
Ako,
Yeah.
Nakaalala ko
Yes,
lang,
Dean.
siyempre sa pinang ng diplomacy, yung track to left, di ba? Track to approach of diplomacy, yung people to people talaga. Ay activate din naman. No? Mag-reach out din. Siguro yung both communities and to do some collaboration and an activity na talaga both these two communities are really intended for peace, prosperity. I'm sure ganoon naman ang interest ng mga yan eh. It just so happen na kapag yung gobyerno ng China ang nakikialam dito sa mga to, nagbabago ang agenda at interest. So that's really a problem. So I agree, sabi nga ni Sherwin na talagang maging honest din talaga itong mga, not honest but rather proactive.
Proactive, yeah.
Mas
That's the
maging
right term.
proactive sila.
And constructive kasi
Constructive, yeah.
problema like I get both sides of the like dun naman sa ibang kaibigan natin feeling nila there's always this unfortunate parang lingering prejudice pag anything China parang there's already you know what I'm saying like historically we have had problems with prejudice. I think we have to be honest about that. But ang point ko naman is if each side is going to be defensive and like not talk to each other
Mas mahirap
wala na
problema.
kaya ako
Mas
I
lalaki yung
engage
problema
different
dyan.
communities
Oo.
even people have completely different points of view kasi parang point ko if magsa-silo tayo this is gonna be a dangerous situation, di ba? Ay, wag mo kausapin mga to, pro-China to. Like, no, let's have an open discussion and, I don't know about the money trail or something. As far as I'm concerned, I don't agree with your argument because of this, di ba? Ikaw, Robin, what is your read in terms of, like, because we have, like, Chinese scholars in the Philippines, visiting scholars, including, where I also teach. Sometimes you have Filipinos who are expert on China, visit China a lot. And what I don't appreciate sometimes people are getting tagged. Ano na to? Ano pro-China to? Ganun. That's not healthy, right? I mean, it doesn't help scholarship, doesn't also help. And actually, it caricaturizes a legitimate discussion about legitimate threats. So how do you approach that? It's tricky, but it has to be done, right?
Yeah. May mga naman, siyempre may mga nag-aaral talaga sa China. Pinag-aaralan nila dahil gusto natin maintindihan yung society nila. But also, actually educational institutions who are immune from that government intervention. Yung
Right.
top institutions where there are really great scientists, social scientists, physical scientists who've won Nobel Prizes. And some universities are, at the top of the university rankings. But there are also some na hindi na sa top. No? And
So you have to be...
nagiging diploma mill. No? So may mga ganun din. So kailangan natin suriin kung sino ba to? Tsaka saan sila nag-aaral? Ano yung rank?
So case-to-case basis, like, I mean, because ang idol namin si Dr. Eileen Baviera, the late Baviera, who was really at the forefront of the dialogue, right? And no one could brand you just because you have a tour visit to China or vice versa. That's why I personally was always open to go back and forth. But you're clear about your terms of engagement. Is this a Tsinghua University, legit top
correct.
university, or is this like, sino to mga to, di ba? Yung mga ganun. So again, it has to be that kind of granular and at the same time calibrated engagement, right? Because for me, ang pinaka-ayoko is yung branding each other. Oh, pro-US ka, pro-China. That's not gonna get us too far. Nevertheless, Dr. Una, I want to come back to this. We do have serious concerns about some local government unit officials really sounding weird, if not acting weird. Some of the people who have been accused, again, we're not going to be libelous. Is, for instance, in Cagayan. In the case of Cagayan, the governor there who's supposed to be a former governor but still there, I don't know what's going on. And then there were even concerns with people, as old as me and Robin, suddenly, but much more fit than us. Like suddenly, undergraduate, biglang nagdagsaan, di ba? Military age, medyo fit, pero medyo... that raised a lot of eyebrows. We had Dr. Chester Cabalsa, who comes from there, on my show, on different shows, also discussing that. What is your read of that? The LGU track.
Yeah,
the backdoor.
ito yung backdoor or soft underbelly ng ating ng ating bansa, no. Kasi nga itong ganitong mga estilo, no, ang tina-target talaga nito yung mga local governments natin na talagang matindi rin yung pangangailangan sa mga investments, sa mga economic incentives, ano. And di mo rin masisi siguro kung itong mga pumapasok na malign influencers na ito ay they pose as legitimate business enterprises or business entities, ano. At nakukuha yung ng ating mga LGU, no. Sa akin naman diyan is kailangan mo rin kasing i-educate yung ating mga LGUs kasi hindi naman na talaga nila alam kung ano itong dumadating sa kanilang mga pintuan, ano? To buy legitimate
to do
business.
the due diligence na sinasabi ni
yung
Robin,
due diligence
diba?
and even yung actually yung baga is
baka yun ang kailangan natin gawin na LGU tour.
Hindi, gusto lang idagdag yan kasi meron
Very
akong
good
na
point,
forum sa DAP.
Right.
In fact, hindi lang LGU ang entry point ng
Malign
Chinese
actors,
government.
malign
Even
actors.
yung mga local universities and colleges. In fact, sa Malabon itself, nag-partner sila ng ibang university na hindi kilala sa China, no? And then they're sending faculty
Filipinos.
members na from local universities and would you imagine, nagulat ang CHED, nagulat ang DILG na
Sino itong mga to? Biglang lumilitaw.
Precisely.
Yung
So,
sister cities projects, ang daming
Sister
ganun.
City. So,
Yan,
pareho sa
medyo
Sister City, tsaka
binabantayan na yan ng ating
also
gobyerno.
yung mga so-called internationalization. Kasi they're very enticing dahil papayagin, you're being invited for 2 weeks visit in China.
Papuntahin ka sa Hainan,
government.
di ba?
So, chance na. So, bahagi yan.
I know.
At marami ito. So, walang accounting ngayon. Kaya maganda yung point mo, Richard, kasi nga, naalala ko lang bigla, kasi it sounds an alarm sa DILG dahil hindi nire-report itong mga sister cities.
Sisters projects.
Na account na between them kasi nga sagot lahat eh. Di ba? Sabi nga ni Sherwin, lalo na sa mga 5th class, 4th class municipality.
Red carpet ang bibigay sa'yo.
Red
5-star
carpet,
hotel.
all the tawag dito, all the vast experiences that you will imagine. Mga gawa nito. So,
And pagkaalam ko din, actually, so I use the term pledge trap dun sa big ticket infrastructure projects ng China na purong pledge, wala naman nangyari, pero na-trap pa rin kasi uto-uto yung presidente mo or worse, right? I'm talking about the former president, obviously, who's in ICC now. But what I was told is maraming small and medium scale projects na actually pumasok.
Marami,
So may
marami.
concrete investments.
Yan ang nakakatakot
Kaya
din.
may dating may grip Kasi parang, nag-build sila ng bridge Meron kaming sister project, may fund kami for this project. So,
scholarship.
So there's a basis for them to be attracted. Hindi lang yung trip lang.
Itong
Talagang
Richard,
may
yung mga,
investments.
yung mga hinuli sa China, di ba? 3 scholars na sinasabi.
Exchange student,
Mga National Spy Agency daw, na bahagi sa National Spy Agency. Di sabi, yung mga estudyante na all of a sudden naging spy. So, ilan yan? Do we have an account of all of this number of students being invited to in China right now to do all this lecture? Then all of a sudden, they will be branded as spy.
Right.
Tsaka, dagdagan ko rin yan, Richard, kasi nga, di ba, nakita naman natin yung nangyari sa Davao del Norte, di ba? Nasa news naman ito, na pumasok doon, kumuha ng late registration, at nakakuha ng birth certificate, Ito yung entry point talaga, yung mga far-flung municipalities, na hindi naman talaga siguro aware kung ano itong mga nangyayaring ito, at
Yeah.
napapayagan nila yung ganitong mga applications. At hindi nila alam na ito ay national security threat.
Well, I remember back in the day, there was like this kind of federalism tour going around the country. There was a DLG program. I think we need something along those lines, but not for federalism, but in terms of sharp power operation. I mean, I suppose in Taiwan, in Europe, they have that for, I'm sure, Finland, those kinds of countries. In fact, alam ko sa Finland, for instance, even kindergarten, tinitrain sa disinformation, right? Maybe we need
Literacy.
something along those lines.
Yeah, definitely, no? Kaya lang, again, ang ano niyan is resources, di ba? Tapos yung program din. But definitely, we can learn a lot from our partners, no?
Ito, may
Taiwan.
libro na, di ba? Meron ng West Philippines
Ayoko
libro.
munang ilabas, baka hindi pa to official, pero slowly we're getting there, Richard, eh. Oh. Kailangan lang natin i-pull
Medyo
together
slow
yung
lang.
ating mga activities, ating mga resources, ano? At saka, hindi lang naman ito, syempre, ang concern ng gobyerno natin, di ba?
And I mean, probably what we need is also kind of we're going to the second part of this discussion because I want to talk about the election and the candidates and all. But before we go there and we take a break for a discussion, like, do you think we need a transparency initiative, bantayan yung mga different LGUs and projects there? I think that would make sense, right? Maybe it could be a public-private partnership. Maybe some of the top university think tanks could be, like, bantayan mo kasi, di ba? Kasi usually you're just focused on either Davao, Manila, and some of the major cities, but you're
Well,
forgetting.
utilize the DILG kasi di ba
Importante yun,
bawat LGU naman may DILG director.
Yes.
So talagang, yung regulatory function ng DILG right now ay talagang gamitin.
No.
So, even yung CHED din, kasi nga, kung hindi sila makapasok sa LGU, ang pinapasok nila yung mga local universities and colleges by offering this type of scholarship na hindi natin alam anong kulatilya niloko natin.
Ako, ang position ko dyan, i-empower mo sila kaysa sa bantayan mo.
Yeah.
Kasi yung bantay will welcome later
Well, yeah.
siguro. Pero pag empowered sila, alam nila kung anong klaseng mga
Yeah.
estilo, yung playbook na sinasabi natin, di ba? Siguro mas magiging, mas magiging meticulous.
I agree.
Or may subtle yung bantay, more open, proactive yung engagement. Hey, you have to do both. Kasi you were just saying, tip of the iceberg lang nakita. Like, just to give you an idea, tip of iceberg, ang daming nahuli ng mga alleged spies na may military-grade cameras and everything. I think we know what's going on. Yung iba nahuli, kumukuha ng pictures sa mga military camps here. Yung iba nahuli doon sa Palawan, I don't know, Balabac, di ba? Last year, lumabas yung report na there was supposedly this journalist representing the Shanghai-based newspaper. Pero alam natin, basically, MSS agent yan. Umalis na siya earlier. But, so, when you say tip of the iceberg, how worried should we be? Like, are there 10 more Alice Go, aka Alice Go Guahua-ping out there? Is that what you mean by that? Is this too scary for us? I mean, like, how do we make sure people don't panic? Like, oh my God, if that's only the tip of the iceberg, right?
Oh, well, alam natin na nandyan lang sila, pero mas lamang pa rin tayo kasi kumpleto yung ating mga mechanisms eh. Hindi pa naman impaired yung ating mga mechanisms. Meron tayong barangay system, di ba? Ang pulis natin ay nandyan, ano? But kailangan lang natin sigurong himayin kung ano yung magti-trigger ng ganong klaseng response eh. Kailan magiging mas alerto yung mga tao natin? Dapat ba silang magpanic? Siyempre hindi, di ba? Pero kung meron silang guidance on how to assess, for example, kung ito bang taong ito ay kahina-hinala.
Yeah.
No, kailangan ko bang i-report tong tao na to? Kanino ko i-report? Sa barangay ko ba? Or meron ba tayong hotline, yung gano'n, ano? Na,
Correct.
para lang, meron din participation yung mga tao. And I'm sure magugustuhan din nila yan.
Grassroots, community-based. But again, you want to make sure it doesn't go crazy, right?
Yes,
Because baka mamaya,
oo.
tokang-tokang na yan. di ba?
Hindi
Ito,
pwede yung
you know what I'm
ganon.
saying? Like, you have to be very careful. Last part before you take a break for the next, which is really the election part. Robin, I mean, for instance, I know the MSS case that kunyaring journalist, tumulong ang US dyan to detect that. We know that, we have friends who are also making sure things don't go wrong because they have an interest, whether it's the Americans, whether it's... Do you think it makes sense for us to work with other countries who have been at the receiving end of this? Well, it doesn't have to be like Taiwan, but it could be like Australia, UK, yung mga countries na may experience din dealing with sharp power operations.
Definitely. So, we're diversifying naman yung alliance natin. And hindi lang yun dapat sa security, but also yung intelligence gathering nga. Pagkalaran natin yung ginagawa ng China dun sa mga bansang yan. So, sa Taiwan, and sabi mo nga sa Australia, sa United States, merong advances in technology, mga methodologies na ginagamit ng intelligence agencies nila para makita talaga itong intervention ng China sa kanilang mga bansa. So but also maybe just to end yung sa akin na Yeah, dapat meron sigurong national information campaign natin.
Yun nga,
You know,
yeah.
from siguro galing sa DILG, yung mga mayors, di ba?
Yeah.
Mga bagong botohan, yung mga bagong naboto ng mga mayors, dapat sabihin sa kanila, ma-mainstream itong foreign policy and China discussion sa mga LGUs. Kasi akala nila hindi sila apektuhan yan.
Yeah.
DFA lang
Yeah.
or DND lang.
Yeah.
No? And yun, yung mga tao and also yung
Good
sa
point,
mga
yeah.
eskwelahan. No? So yeah, I think it should be spearheaded by the national government. And, you know, medyo top-down din, but also, yung approach, syempre, yung grassroots, para aware yung mga tao kung ano talaga yung dangers at saka kung ano yung pwedeng mangyari in the next few months and few years.
I mean, do you think public ad in the Philippines should also have a section on this, LGU empowerment, the geopolitics of local government? I mean, this is interesting. You have an intersection of global great power competition and LGU politics, right? This is quite a new development.
Well, what's really happening right now in the Philippines, mukhang there's really a need also for do some sort of soul searching in Philippine public administration.
Right.
Ang problema kasi, di ba, masyado tayo nakafocus lang on, on efficiency, effectivity, governance. But we are somehow lacking yung issues ng democracy. Actually, yan issue sa public administration din naman. That's why we really have to infuse the idea where, government instrumentalities also are in the forefront. Not only of making an effective and efficient public service, but also for extending our democratic institutions. Tingin ko ito rin yung dapat na direksyon ngayon ng ating pamahalaan. No? Kaya ngayon, sabi ni Sir, we i-empower natin sila. At the same time, we have to imbue the value ng democracy, which is should be an important pillar of our governance service. No? Hindi lang tayo nagkokoto kung kani-kanino na sasabihin nila ay eto, meron kayong biyaya sa amin, sumunod na lang kayo. No? But at the end of the day, you are what? Disempower the people, redirecting the interests of your policies towards one specific state. So, kaya sasabi kong soul searching na sana kasama ito na gawin din natin sa ginagawa sa ating voters education na calling for a real administrative reform where we are increasing the role of the civil society and also extending our democratic institutions.
Well, on that note, because this is perfect segue for the next part of our long discussion, which is the elections. As we speak, we're just a few days removed from that. So on that note, thank you very much, everyone, for joining this first part of our long conversation about malign foreign interference, sharp power, and of course, making sure na patriotic yung voting natin. And at the end of the day, this is a celebration not only of our democracy, but also about the protection of the foundations of our national interest. On that note, thank you very much for joining this latest episode of FYI and Voter Education program. Siguro next time, pati LGU leaders dapat kasama natin dito. Perfect na perfect. Siguro dito. Thank you so much and catch you soon.